Randy Speck. I'm the chair of ANC 34G and chair of this task force as well. This is the Comprehensive Plan Task Force. And so all we're going to be talking about tonight is the comprehensive plan. First, let's get some introductions of the... Maybe I want to talk a little closer into it. Is that better? Is that any better? Okay. I'll swallow the microphone here. Okay, the first thing we'll do is have everyone on the task force introduce themselves in maybe one sentence of what their background is. Andrea, you want to start?
My name is Andrea Rosen. I've been a resident of Barnaby Woods since 1986.
My name is Alan Sieber. I've lived on 39th Street for more than 40 years, and I've been active in the zoning rewrite and all kinds of other things.
My name is Ron Eichner. I've been a resident of this ANC for about 45 years. As I've done before, full disclosure, I have a planning and urban design background and an infill urban developer with no interest whatsoever. I work in DC, but I have no interest in Ward 3.
Hi, my name is Linda Comas. I'm a landscape architect and urban designer. I live on Livingston Street. I've lived in DC since 1984, but I'm a newbie to the neighborhood. I've only lived here 11 years.
I'm even newer. We have lived here about 5 years. We are a Lafayette family. Can you hear me okay? We're a Lafayette family, so I've been shuttling information back and forth to the Lafayette community. My education was in history and architecture, and my work has been in economic development.
Can you all speak up?
Hello, I'm Jerry Mallix. I'm the commissioner for ANC 3G05, which is this side of Connecticut to Broad Branch from Chevy Chase Circle down to about Military, and I've lived here since 2003.
My name is Jonathan Guy. I've lived in the area for 25 years, and both of my children attended and do still attend DC public schools.
Well, I'm Chris Fromboludi. I'm an ANC commissioner, and I've lived here for 30 years. I'm also an architect.
Okay, just to round it out, I've lived here for 35 years. So we've got some long residents here. First, let me make a couple of comments about the procedures that we're going to go through tonight. This is primarily a discussion among the task force members. We want to hear from the community as well, but with so many people here tonight, I will tell you this is 3 times more people than we've had at any other meeting. And we've had lots of input from the community so far. We'll hear a lot more about that. But we need to get the task force on the same page about a number of issues related to a comprehensive plan. So we're going to be discussing among ourselves a lot too. But we do want, and we certainly if we have time, hear from you as well. But if everybody spoke for about 30 seconds, we'd take up the entire 2 hours. So we're going to have to be a little bit judicious about how we use our time. The first sort of announcement is we want to make sure everybody is very polite, respectful of everyone else. I know these issues sometimes get very heated. We want to make sure everybody is talking with each other and not just yelling at each other. And we also want to make sure that everybody is heard, so please respect that and use the microphones, because otherwise people are not going to be able to be heard. We'll pass a microphone around to people who want to speak, but please wait to be recognized and then you can speak. Okay, as I said, this is the 4th meeting that we've had in this task force, 4th public meeting. And I will also say that there have been a lot of discussion among the task force members, usually by email. But we've had several individual meetings, one-on-one as well. But we've been going over this a lot since October 28th, which was when the ANC created this task force. There's a lot more information available on our website, and if you particularly interested in the background for this, I'd suggest you go to our minutes for the October 28th meeting. That contains a lot of the background and information about it. There are a lot of people here who have not been here before, and so I want to give you some background. This is going to be a little bit longer than I would ordinarily do, but I'll give you some background so that we can all at least have a general idea of what we're talking about with the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan has 4 major components that we're interested in. The first is called the framework element, and that is the overall picture of the whole comprehensive plan. It was presented by the Office of Planning to the Council a year and a half ago, more than that, almost 2 years ago. And the Council spent about a year and a half mulling it over. They had a very long hearing one day to take testimony. And then they eventually produced a revised version of the framework element, and then that was passed by the Council on October 8th of this year. So that the framework element is set in stone. We can't change that, it is the law. The second group of elements are called the citywide elements, and these are things like educational facilities, transportation, land use, a whole variety of other topics that apply across the city. Then the next is what's called the future land use map, and that map is over on the wall there. It's the one on the left. There are actually 2 maps. The other one is the general policy map. Future land use map is of more interest to us, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And then finally, there are area elements, and the one that is of interest to us is the Rock Creek West element. And I think Mary Lise may have passed out some summaries of that area element as it relates to our ANC and the area around us. It really basically includes all of Ward 3 and the part of Ward 4 that is west of the park. One item about the future land use map, it is not a zoning map. It is just looking at what might be built over the next 20 years in particular areas, and the plans for what they think, the Office of Planning think we ought to be built in the next 20 years. But it is not a zoning map, and so it doesn't change anything with regard to zoning in and of itself. Now, one other element of all of this is affordable housing, and that comes up both in the comprehensive plan and in a document that the mayor issued that's called the Housing Equity Report. And Mary Lise has got a copy of that there. It's online as well. We spent one entire meeting talking about affordable housing and what it means in our neighborhood and what it means for the city as a whole. And so we had a very candid and forthright discussion about affordable housing, I think, which is very useful. The Housing Equity Report and the Comprehensive Plan indicate that this area of the city, Rock Creek West, that's that entire area of Ward 3 and a portion of Ward 4 west of the park. That area has only 470 affordable units now. Now, you've got to remember, affordable units means the way they count it. It does not include things like rent control. It does not include Section 8 housing. All of those are not considered affordable units because they do not have a limit on the income level of the occupants, of the tenants. If you have an income level restriction, then that's categorized as affordable housing. And it's an income level versus the median family income for the area. And that's about $121,000 for a family of 4. And it's a percentage of that, 30%, 50%, 80%. And there are various objectives then for affordable housing for those groups. Now, there are 470 of those kinds of units in the area now, and the mayor has said, and this plan proposes, 1,990 new units by 2025 in this whole area. So that's a very ambitious objective. One other term I should mention is inclusionary zoning. This is sometimes called IZ. It is the requirement that for a developer who's going to build more than 10 units, they have to set aside a certain portion of those that will be affordable under the standards for what counts as affordable. As of 2017, that program had produced about 600 affordable units throughout its entire history. It was about 10 years, 600 units. And then they were expecting another 800 units over the next several years at a pace of about 200 units a year. So it's a fairly slow pace with inclusionary zoning. But there are other ways that affordable housing can be built, and we talked about those at some length at our November 21st meeting. Now let's talk about specifically the issue that we concentrated on in this discussion with this task force over the last 3 meetings. And that is the change in the future land use map for what is designated as future use for this strip of Connecticut Avenue, from Livingston Street to Chevy Chase Circle. And it's currently on the map as low density commercial. That basically just means what's there right now. You can see it's commercial on the first floor. Sometimes there are businesses or other commercial enterprises on the second or even third floor in a couple of instances. But it's low rise, very low rise. Now what they are proposing is that it be changed to mixed use so that it could be low density commercial the way it is now, but with moderate density residential as well, which means that residential units could be built above the commercial businesses along this corridor. And also, the same affordable housing objectives would apply there as well, trying to get some additional affordable housing through the increase in density along the Connecticut Avenue corridor. As I said, the November 21st meeting, we focused on the affordable housing issue specifically, and I will try to summarize the consensus that was developed as a result of that. The first is that more affordable and workforce housing. Workforce housing is basically housing that firefighters, police officers, teachers, librarians, those people could afford to live in the city. Right now, very few of them can afford to live in the city. So workforce housing would be housing that they could afford as well. But that more affordable and workforce housing in our community is desirable to promote diversity, to provide housing in the district for public servants, and to address the district-wide concerns about equity. One of the things that they pointed out in the mayor's housing equity report is that affordable housing is concentrated basically east of the river, and in those areas, not so much in this area. On December 2nd, we met again, and the task force then focused on the development along Connecticut Avenue, and we arrived at some general consensus about the characteristics of what we would like to see in that corridor. We'll be talking about that, I'm sure, a little bit later. Also, and Jerry Mallitz is going to give us a report on this in a moment too, but we talked about the survey that the task force had sent out, and it went live on December 2nd to get information back from the community about what it was that the community wants. Just to give you a full briefing on all the things that have been going on December 7th, there was a meeting probably attended by 200 or 300 people at Wilson High School, a presentation by the Office of Planning. It did not answer a lot of questions, but it gave us an opportunity to talk to some of the staff people there and to get specific answers to specific questions. Then on December 9th, at the ANC's regular meeting in December, Andrew Trueblood, who is the director of the Office of Planning, was here, and he gave a presentation and answered questions at that time as well. So that was another opportunity we had to get more information. So tonight's meeting is the culmination of all of that effort. And we have been, I would say, all of us on the task force have been working very hard to try to come up with ideas and some plans and some things we could comment on to the Office of Planning. Now, we were operating at all this time under a deadline, which was for December 20th, Friday. The Office of Planning had required that all public comments by anyone in the public generally, they had to be in by December 20th, next Friday. And so we were pushing to get as much done as possible before then. Well, today, late this afternoon actually, the Office of Planning announced a change in the schedule. And this is going to be important, I think, for everyone. Now the public will have until January 10th, 2020 to submit comments. And previously the ANC would then had a period of time after the public comment period ended in order to present a resolution to the Office of Planning. And that was previously January 31st. It's now been extended to February 14th. So there's some additional time available for us to come up with our comments that we submit to the Office of Planning, either individually or through the ANC. They're really encouraging comments to come through the ANC, and there's an advantage to that in that the ANC's views are required to have great weight. And that simply means that the Office of Planning has to specifically address them. They have to, in writing, describe the reasons why they're not going along with our recommendations if they don't. So it gives it a little bit more heft and a little bit more opportunity to actually have Office of Planning do something with it. So we're taking it very seriously and trying to make sure our voice is heard. So tonight, as our agenda indicates, basically we were focusing on trying to get to a final report. And the task force would produce a report that would then go to full ANC for its consideration as a resolution. The first thing we're going to talk about tonight is Jerry's going to give us an update on the status of the survey, not the results of the survey, but rather just the demographics of who's responding and that kind of thing. Then we're going to discuss the scope of the task force report. How broadly do we want to make this? And we had some recommendations in our very first ANC meeting on October 28th that we ought to focus on just 4 or 5 issues, because otherwise this is going to get lost in the shuffle. And if we concentrate on those 4 or 5 issues, then we can have an impact. So that's what we've been doing. But we'll talk about the scope of that report. Then we have been circulating among ourselves some various drafts of portions of the report, and we'll be talking about some of the things we're including there and the things we're still working on. Then we'll talk about additional comments, and I know that there are some areas where we have some expertise, particularly in an area like the street lighting, which our ANC has been very active on. We've had some members of the community who've been very active. We may want to make comments on things like that as well. And finally, we'll talk about the steps necessary to finalize the report and get it to the commission. I just want to make one other point, because there's been a lot of rumors on various listservs about the Episcopal Center for Children. I want to be very clear. The comprehensive plan says nothing about the Episcopal Center. There are no plans by anyone to change the current use of the center, and neither the task force nor the ANC intends to include anything about the Episcopal Center's future in comments to the Office of Planning on the proposed comprehensive plan amendments. We've got our hands full with what we're doing, and we're not going to try to do anything more than So that's not a topic for tonight's discussion. And so if you're here just for to talk about the Episcopal School, we're not going to talk about that because there's really no purpose to be served in it. Okay, with that much longer introduction than I had intended, I hope that was helpful to people to get some background. Now, Jerry, you want to talk about the survey and where we stand on that?
Sure. Before I start, there are about a half dozen people standing. If there's an empty chair next to you, could you just raise your hand if they want to sit? So if you want to find a place to sit, there's some empty chairs to go to. Okay, first, a little of my background, why I'm even talking about this. Before I left the U.S. Department of Education a long time ago, about 10 years ago, I was a survey statistician. I ran some of the largest data collection efforts about education across the country. I left the department as the Chief Information Technology Officer for all research and statistics in the department. So I've been dealing with this kind of stuff for a long time. A couple of things I want to say about the survey. So we all know that DC completed a survey on the same topic. Their survey, they gave out at 24 community events across DC, including 2 events in Ward 3. It was open for 14 weeks, and they got about 900 responses from people on paper at the meetings and about another 1,800 online. About 300 of those were not residents of DC. So they got about a total of 2,400 DC residents, and that includes 209 in Ward 3 and 361 in Ward 4. Just to give you a little something to compare it with, the 209 in Ward 3 represents 0.1% of the total population of Rock Creek West. So we came up with the idea for a survey to try to get some community input. As Randy mentioned, we opened it up exactly 2 weeks ago on December 2nd. We publicized it in newsletters, on listservs, on Nextdoor, people's personal email lists, many different places. And as of 6:15 p.m. tonight, we were already up to 542 responses, which is just a few short of the total that DC got for Wards 3 and Ward 4 combined. Our response rate for the full population of, one of the things I like to do, since this is a self-selecting sample, people respond if they want to respond, is to try to get as close to a reliable count of population distribution by certain demographics. I chose age to do this with. And our ANC really corresponds to 4 census tracts. And those 4 census tracts have 16,600 people in them. So when you break that down, we're almost spot on with every age distribution. We're a little bit short on 26 to 35, and we're a little bit over on 65 and up, but only 5% on both of those. The other categories, 36 to 45, 46 to 55, 56 to 64, are almost exactly right. So we're doing a very good job on the age distribution. The other thing that we wanted to check was where people live. You can't ask people an address and tell them that everything is confidential, so we just asked your polling location. And there were 5 that we asked about: Chevy Chase Community Center and Lafayette Elementary School, Murch, St. John's, and Wesley, Methodist Church, and the bulk from Chevy Chase Community Center and Lafayette. But that gives us a total, in the 2 wards, we have 281 so far in Ward 3, 254 in Ward 4, and a couple that are outside the scope, about 5 of them that are outside that scope. So there too, we're getting a very good representation of the people who live in the different areas. And lastly, we asked people how long they lived in their current location, because in a proactive way to make sure that people can't say that we're only catching older people that have lived here a long time. We'll be able to do some crosstabs on age and how long people have lived in their current location. And actually, 22% have lived here 0 to 5 years, which is the second largest group behind more than 20 years. So there too, we have a very good distribution. And even though I didn't bring the numbers, I already did the crosstabs for the age by length of time, and I'm not concerned about anything there. The last thing I did to make sure that people don't say that we stuffed the ballot box, and nobody knows the results. I know a little bit, but nobody else knows the results. And so I did a full analysis of the IP addresses of all the respondents. IP addresses can be broken down into static IP addresses, which not many people have, and dynamic IP addresses. All that means is if you're like Comcast, they can assign a range of IP addresses to people. So I analyzed those by the time that the survey was done, by the device that a person used, and then if I saw anything that looked even slightly suspicious, I looked to see if the responses were the same, and I'm happy to report that I found no unusual patterns, and I'm happy with everything that we have there. So all that said, that's where we stand right now. We plan to, the survey will end Friday night at 11:59 p.m. It was just announced today in the ANC 34G newsletter. On Thursday, we're going to have final follow-up on many different lists and everything. So I'm hoping that, well, we have 540 now. Today alone, we get today so far 45. So even if we get about 25 to 30 each of the next few days, we'll get close to 700, which would bring us to about 5% of the total population, and that includes kids. So that's a very good response rate. So that's where we are with the survey right now. I encourage you, if you haven't already taken it, to do so. The link is almost everywhere that you could look these days. I think it's Chevy Chase comprehensive plan, chevychase.questionpro.com.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
My name is Jessica Lee. I live on 27 between Northampton and Nebraska. So the questionnaire was actually what got me thinking about the ECC site, because the questionnaire specifically identifies that site and how we feel about it for affordable housing. So we did people do want to talk about that. We also understand that some ANC members, or at least one, have met with the ECC board to discuss this, and it's something we found out through the ECC.
Well, I actually sent an email to the ECC this summer when they just said, I'm Crystal Wright.
Oh, yes, yes.
Well,
Yeah, sorry, because I think it's pertinent to what my neighbor's saying.
Yeah.
I'm Crystal Wright, I live at 5853 Nebraska Avenue, Northwest. I can talk really loud. Can you hear me? Yeah, I was a cheerleader, so I might not be a pretty thing now, but I was a cheerleader. It gave me a lot of confidence and a big voice. So I live at 5853 Nebraska Avenue, right across from the school. And we were chagrined, a lot of us, when the school, the Episcopal Center for Children, said that they were no longer going to be operational because they've been a fixture in the community and served the needs of kids and provided a lot of jobs in the neighborhood and just been great neighbors. So I was really perplexed when you said that the Episcopal Center was not part of the plan, because the chairman of the board, Mr. Speck, said that you stopped by specifically at the school recently and you encouraged the school to sell the property as part of the comprehensive plan, and I have it in the email. And secondly, as my neighbor pointed out, I took the survey, great survey, thanks for sending it around, and I hope more of my neighbors take it. And in the survey, which I pulled up on my phone just now, it specifically mentions the Episcopal Center for Children. So I think it's important to be transparent, especially at a time when Lafayette, the school that's in our neighborhood, as strained as it is, it went through a renovation about 2 to 3 years ago. And for those of us who have lived in the neighborhood, maybe not 30 years, 10 years,
we do have a say in what's going on in the community. And I think that, as my neighbor pointed out, you have strained resources as it is. You probably need another school operational in our neighborhood. We can talk about housing, that's why we're here. We need more green spaces. But I think you need to hear from all the neighborhood neighbors, and 200 neighbors is not enough for this comprehensive plan. What's here tonight is minuscule. And I'm very upset, and I think that you all seem to have the same philosophy about, I'd like to know how you got on the board, if there's a difference of opinion among you, because life is about diversity of opinion. Social justice, if that's what you're trying to do through housing, is a matter of diversity of thought.
I have just one final question, not a question, but a point really, but is that it was my understanding that the ECC had been on the agenda for tonight and was taken off after there was so much of a response next door and so much of a turnout that you changed your mind not to talk about it because we're all here.
Yeah, let me tell you why I changed my mind, and I did. And I think it was probably a mistake to have put that on the questionnaire. I acknowledge that mistake. But I met with one board member and the executive director because she had come to our meeting, our ANC meeting, and then a question was raised at the very first of our task force meetings, I think, or maybe it was at the October 28th meeting. Anyway, someone raised a question at the meeting, and so I then asked if I could just talk to her about what their plans were. I didn't talk about anything for the future of what it might be. What I said was, what are you going to do? And they had some ideas, but they didn't have any clue as to what they were actually going to do. They don't know right now. And ultimately, it's up to them, because they're going to be the ones who have to make a decision as to whether they continue in their current focus, which they would like to do. And so that's what they're, I think, looking at first. And I said, you know, let's just stay in contact, keep me posted on what's going to happen. Now, with regard to the comprehensive plan, there's literally nothing in the comprehensive plan that addresses that site.
But the questionnaire mentions...
I agree, and that was a mistake. We shouldn't have even raised it at that point. What I want to do at some point, and it's really a matter of resources to be able to look at all of these issues at once. Since this is not something that's going to come up in the comprehensive plan as it's been proposed, and we've got a lot of other issues we need to address, I want to address the Episcopal Center at some point, but we don't have to do it now. And I want to do it in a very transparent way. I want to involve as many people as possible in that discussion. And so I think, but I don't think this is the right time for it. And the reason why it's not the right time is it's just a distraction from the issues that are in the comprehensive plan that we must address. And let me tell you too, a key issue that we've discussed at all of these meetings has been schools, and that we don't have enough school facilities. There is an educational facilities element of the comprehensive plan. We're going to have a lot of comments about how it affects this area particularly, and that the projections for growth are inconsistent with the real absence of any plans for accommodating the kids that are going to be involved in that. So we're addressing the educational aspect of it. But I think we will spin our wheels a bit and not get to some of these other important issues if we focus on the ECC now. I fully intend that, and especially if there's an interest in doing it, that we will look at this issue in the future. And let me emphasize too, we are not done with planning by any means with this comprehensive plan. There is already in the works, I can't remember what Andrew Trueblood told us, but there's going to be a whole new comprehensive plan in 2025 or something like that. It's already scheduled. Nothing's going to happen between now and then in any case. So we can just hold that and come back to it and address it thoroughly, comprehensively, in a way that focuses really on that issue. And that's what I would propose that we do. And, you know, we do have plenty to deal with here. So I think that the best use of everybody's time is to do that. Now, with regard to the composition of the task force, self-selected. Whoever wanted to be on it could be on it. And this was done back in late October. There is an enormous diversity of opinion. Let me tell you, the number of emails that we exchange daily with differences of opinion are significant. So, I mean, this is not like there's one point of view here at all. It is at least 10 or 11 points of view. We have two members who are not here tonight who are, and a commissioner as well. There's one other commissioner, but also two business people. So we've tried to be as diverse as we could on the committee, and we've gotten a lot of different points of view, and I think it's reflected, and we've been struggling with how do we reach a consensus, which we're trying to do. But I think it's worked actually pretty well. I'd like to hear from the other task force members.
I'm Mary-Lise Foss, and I don't know if my microphone I used earlier was working. So I'm a member of the Lafayette community. We are a newer family in the neighborhood, been here about 5 years. I've been shuttling information to and from this group and its meetings to, for example, the Lafayette Facebook page and email list I have of hundreds of people in Lafayette, the Lafayette Tuesday Bulletin, which is an e-newsletter that goes out to the entire Lafayette community. The survey will be included in that tomorrow, from what I understand. So I've been doing my best to make sure that busy and maybe even frazzled parents know what's going on, because I understand, as a parent myself of a third grader at Lafayette, that infrastructure issues like schools capacity is a massive underpinning of this effort and needs to be coordinated. And I commend the task force. It really is self-selected. I just came to an ANC meeting and he said that anybody could join, and I sort of said, well, I don't have any specific planning skills, but I would like to join and honestly just know what's going on. I wanted to see how this process went so I could go back and tell Lafayette. So I'm sort of a spy here, but I'm very open about it. And I've been joking about that, but I really do report back and forth as best I can and as openly as I can. And I commend the task force for considering schools and educational infrastructure more and more and more and more. And I hope I played some part in that. Certainly the survey respondents, on like, not necessarily survey respondents because we haven't seen a response, but like, I should say, listserv respondents and like the Lafayette Facebook group and everything. I report everything that the Lafayette Facebook group says to the task force. And so the school's capacity is now a major part of how we discuss this. And I don't know that it was as much at the beginning. So I feel like people have really understood people's concerns. It's not just schools, of course, it's parking and transportation and everything else that all of you have said. Like I went through the listserv today and I took notes, and I know that many others on the task force have done something exactly like this. Took notes on all the different kinds of concerns that community members have been voicing on the Chevy Chase listserv, and people have been looking at Nextdoor and everything. So we've been trying to scour and record and notate qualitatively as well as quantitatively what people are saying, and these meetings are super important, so I'm so glad to see so many of you here. Thank you.
I think the nature, the intensity of the many expectations of discussion tonight illuminates the need to organize a fairly large-scale discussion of this in connection with the ANC. I'm a member of this task force, but not of the ANC. But I mean, just looking around the room and being a careful reader of the listserv, it's clear that this is a discussion that involves not only the affordable housing, and at some scale there, and schools. You know, we've been trying to think through issues that are more inchoate, actually. That's an actual neighborhood physical problem. And so it demands the attention of everyone in this community.
So My name is Jonathan Guy. I hear very loud and clear the concerns about the neighbors close by to the Episcopal school. You should know that the original survey was proposed to have specific questions about, well, where do people think development should be? The task force decided that that would not be appropriate because no one should be choosing, well, there should be development in this street as opposed to that street. So there is not a specific question saying, well, there should be development at the Episcopal school. It's more a category of, it was intended, and it was a mistake, but it was more a category of public facilities as opposed to for-profit development. And I want to echo what Randy said. There is nothing in the comprehensive plan that talks about changing the flume designation for that school. Nothing at all. So nothing that is going to happen today or through this process is going to change the zoning at that school or the flume designation at that school. Oh, I'm sorry. The future land use map is the map here, and that is what we are talking about because the Office of Planning is, as Randy explained, is changing the density on Connecticut Avenue, increasing the density on Connecticut Avenue. But there is no proposal from the Office of Planning or anyone to change the density at that location, which is currently listed as an educational facility. So I understand the concern. No one wants there to be, there's the worry that there's some sort of deal being done, no one knows about it, and then it's going to be presented to the community. We hear that loud and clear, and the task force is that loud and clear. So.
Just a very quick comment. I'm sending around a piece of paper for people to put their name and their email so that they can be informed of these meetings, and we'll give it to you so that you can let us know when you have meetings like this or about the Episcopal Center or whatever.
We have a website. And you can go to our website anytime. It has all of our meetings there. And we will be glad to put you on our newsletter email list, which is a monthly newsletter. It has all the meetings that are identified there as well. So anybody, by all means, we have tried very, very diligently, and Jerry has been quite involved in this, to reach out and get as many email addresses of people as we possibly could. And we've got a couple of thousand. But it's not everybody. And so we always are looking for ways in which we can better get the word out to the community.
We're helping you tonight.
Okay, good. Oh yeah, the website is on the agenda. If you have a copy of the agenda, the letterhead, our letterhead, wherever you see our letterhead has the website. I should also have mentioned at the beginning, for this meeting, we haven't done this for the previous task force meeting, but for this meeting, we are videotaping it, video recording it, no tape anymore, and we post all of those on our YouTube channel, and all of our meetings are posted on the YouTube channel as well. And so you'll be able to go there and view the entire meeting if you'd like. Or there's always a link or a jump where you can go to specific agenda items within that 2-hour video recording. Okay.
We're also posted on the CDC listserv and the Facebook page.
Yes.
There are many ways to overwhelming.
Yeah, we put it out in every conceivable way. John?
The only thing I would add is I would encourage all of you and everybody you know who has concerns and issues with the process and what's happening with the Office of Planning's proposals is to send your communications to the ANC members who are on the task force. They're probably going to be hating me for saying that, but this is your opportunity to say what you think, and we want to incorporate what you think. Thank you.
And if you don't know your ANC commissioner, you can send it to me, and I'll make sure we see it. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay, that said, let me go to the next item on our agenda, which is to discuss the scope of the committee's or the task force's work. I thought the best way to do this, and this is something that we've been working on over the last 48 hours pretty intensively, to come up with fundamental principles. And I'm going to just read these because they were the subject of a lot of discussion and negotiation to come up with something that we all the members of the task force agreed were fundamental principles. And they sort of define, I think, the overall scope of what we're focusing on. The first is we support creating additional affordable and workforce housing in Rock Creek West, including along the Connecticut Avenue Gateway. And we're calling this the gateway from Maryland into the district. The comprehensive plan identifies a number of gateways into the district that they give special planning credence to, but they don't identify ours. And so we are asking them to identify the Connecticut Avenue or Chevy Chase Gateway. And we encourage nonprofit and public development because it will be more likely, it's more likely to produce a higher proportion of affordable units. And that's basically in order to get the most bang for the buck, frankly. If we're not going to have huge buildings here, we want to have a higher proportion that is affordable housing. Number two, new development in Rock Creek West, including along the Connecticut Avenue Gateway, must first and foremost include infrastructure planning to support the expected population growth and not exacerbate existing infrastructure constraints. This includes funding, siting, and building sufficient public schools to eliminate current overcrowding and to provide adequate space and a learning environment consistent with the expected growth. Other infrastructure needs, for example, transportation, recreation centers, parks, fire, police, commercial and residential parking, public utilities, must also be proactively addressed. I just will say as an aside, although there is an educational facilities element within the comprehensive plan, they do not get specific about where schools need to be built, how they're going to do that, how they're going to fund it. Those kinds of things are absolutely crucial. Otherwise, you don't get any infrastructure built. And we can't have population growth without addressing the infrastructure concerns. Third, the task force is now asking the Office of Planning to change the proposed FLUM designation for the Connecticut Avenue Gateway. That's the future land use map designation. As I mentioned before, the current designation is low-density commercial. They've upgraded that to low-density commercial and moderate-density residential. We're not contesting that now. We accept the designation of mixed-use low-density commercial and moderate-density residential, even without firm definitions of what that specifically means, so long as there is a requirement for additional small area planning and applicable language in the Rock Creek West area element. In other words, we're not going to just trust that map with its very broad definitions. What we want a commitment that they're going to have a small area plan process, which basically looks at this 4-block strip here and says what specifically should occur in that area, not in some just broad general definition. Fourth, and finally, our primary ask of the Office of Planning is that it firmly state in the comprehensive plan that there must be a small area plan for the Connecticut Avenue Gateway and that the Rock Creek West element address potential impact of increased density, including infrastructure constraints such as school overcrowding. This small area plan would develop policies that reflect not only today's environment, but future community needs, and give a clear direction for development. This plan should be developed before any zoning commission consideration of upzoning. our comments will specify some of the topics that should be addressed in the small area plan and the Rock Creek West element. So we're going to have very specific recommendations for how they change the comprehensive plan in order to make sure that we get this small area plan and integration with the rest of the elements that we need. Okay, anyone? Jerry, you want to comment on that? Let's let Jerry go first, then Ron.
My comment is pretty straightforward. This is a conceptual framework of things based on what task force members and their knowledge has talked about. We're going to let the survey results also inform us because it could inform us and make changes to those things, and it should make changes to those things depending on the results that we get from the survey. So none of this takes into account any of the responses that we've gotten so far. We will get, and I just want everybody to realize that that could change some things based on the results that we get. In my opinion.
I just wanted to take just a brief moment, because there's a lot of people who are sort of new to this discussion here, just to make sure that a couple of the steps in the process that Randy described are clear. After these comp plan changes are made, including changes to the future land use map, as Randy pointed out, it's not zoning. So the next step after that to allow the increased density that the future land use, that the future land use plan anticipates, property owners would have to come and ask for their property to be upzoned. What we're asking for is that between those two events, between the approval of Jerry, this is your microphone. Hello? Okay. Between the event of the approval of the comprehensive plan and any upzoning, we're asking for a step to be inserted, which is a term of art in the planning and zoning world, a small area plan. And what that small area plan would do is look at how that increased density would fit within our community, and it would involve the real nitty-gritty, really granular stuff. And that's a serious ask to change the process, because it's not automatically done.
And the bottom line of Randy and Jerry and Ron's comments, thank you for walking us through those aspects, is that, as we've said, but I just want to reiterate, it's all about your voices, opinions, thoughts, issues, and concerns. So every single survey respondent through 11:59 p.m. at Friday will be counted, tallied, and will be part of changing the very draft nature of what Randy spoke. All survey respondents will be equally weighted in affecting what our report, and equally so, we are trying to make sure that as a community, so that's your individual voice, we're also trying to make sure that we as a community have a voice and are heard in the process, which is what this extra planningness of the small area plan is all about, that we can put the brakes on and have time to look at things intelligently, collectively, and just be planful and mindful about what's happening to our community. So again, it's not just sort of automatically happening to us, that we can participate in the process a little bit more.
Randy, I think one very important procedure step which you don't have.
Get the mic.
Don't take this one.
One very important procedural step. One very important. One very important procedural step, which I think you've mentioned many times before in other meetings, is that this thing has to go to the DC Council. And who knows when they're going to approve that. I have professional colleagues in the Office of Planning who think it might be sometime next July, next August. I think, Randy, you said something like that.
End of the year.
End of the year. So, for all those people who are new, it's not just a matter of the DC office getting it and say, that's it. They have to go back to the DC Council to get approval. And the last time they had to go back to the DC Council for something called the framework element, which is policy. It took the DC Council over a year, if I'm not mistaken, to finish that. So that is a very important step. It's not tomorrow. It's not 6 months from now. You got plenty of time.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, Lee. I should have mentioned it earlier, but the council will almost certainly hold hearings on this as well. And if the framework element is any indication, they will also make lots and lots and lots and lots of changes based on the input that they get from constituents. So it's a long process. I would be surprised if the council adopts the rest of the comprehensive plan by the end of next year.
But the first line of defense isn't the council, it's you all, and you said the ANC carries great weight, as you know, it's a legal matter. So I'm Laura Hayden-Hilliard, I live on Livingston Street, I've lived there for about 20 years, and I actually grew up in this neighborhood, so I've lived here for more than 50 years, my whole life. So, as a threshold matter, why are you all immediately agreeing to the new designation for a higher density residential?
Well, a part of it, I'll speak for myself, and then others can speak on the task force as well, but part of it is a practical matter. That's going to be done. And if we don't have this intermediate step of small area plan, it will be shoved down our throats. I mean, that's my belief. This is it's not just this neighborhood, it is the entire city, where they are, as Ron put it, up-flumming everything. And if we just came in and said, no, don't do that, number one, we would get pegged as being an elitist neighborhood, obstructionist that doesn't want any other kinds of people in our neighborhood. I mean, that's the reality. That's the way we would be portrayed. And they would dismiss us.
Well, I think you'd only be portrayed that way if you can't make the argument. I mean, this is actually, we all know Mayor Bowser is in the pocket of the developers, so this whole plan is a great opportunity for them to be able to take over space. This isn't going to be affordable housing. This is going to be market rate housing. And that's what's actually happening. And you look at the proposal from Holland and Knight to take over the Circle Liquor Walk and tear it down. They're not building affordable housing. The proposal from Jamal Development to tear down the building over here next to Bruder's, it's not affordable housing. That's actually a charade. So this city desperately needs affordable housing. It needs mixed income housing. It needs low income housing. I wouldn't actually oppose that in any way. But that's not what this is. So they're using that, which they failed to provide, as you said yourself, 800 units in so many years. That's not what's going to happen.
For just Rock Creek.
No, that's
the entire city. The entire city. Yeah, please don't talk unless you're recognized, please.
But this isn't going to change this. I mean, if
Well,
we don't stand up and actually lay down what's happening and fight back against this, I mean, if the threshold is we're agreeing, but we're going to ask them for this interim other plan, I mean, why not actually talk about what's going on here, stand up, define it, and say, we're going to oppose this in the absence of.
Well, that's basically what we're saying. Unless we're saying it is contingent on getting the small area plan.
But that plan doesn't, what you're describing doesn't say anything, it doesn't do anything. I mean, they're going to drive out the small businesses that have been here, because they're going to tear down these buildings. And and those two amendments, which you haven't discussed, so I don't know what your position on them is, but up and down, with the exception of the places that are historically recognized, Avalon, the Arcade,
we're talking about that, our plan is to talk about that extensively in the report. But the bottom line, we've agreed, is that, but it's subject to change. I mean, if the groundswell against it, we'll consider that. But yeah, the thing is, we've worked really hard to try to come up with something that we think will ultimately achieve our goals. And I believe, I think we will get affordable housing if we come in with a plan. Well, I know you're shaking your head, but I think we'll get a lot of affordable housing if we make that a priority. And there are some spaces that are public spaces right now that we might also consider for affordable housing, like building something above the library. That's public space, and that could be affordable housing for sure. And I think there is, I think we can get all of these things if we work hard to do them and are proactive in it. We've got to be out there in front of the developers. We've got to be one step ahead of the developers. And one thing I've got in mind right now, and I haven't talked about it with the other task force members, but for instance, we could spend the next year, while the council is considering all this, I'll get to you in a second, but we could spend the next year actually developing our own plan and saying, here's what our vision is. And we could enlist the help of the very talented people in this neighborhood to come up with specific plans about what the look of this corridor will be, about not only what kind of housing could be there, but specific plans about how we could do that housing. I mean, for instance, I hope we can get nonprofits like Habitat for Humanity interested in doing projects here. And that, I think, we can push and we can do. If we can control a lot more if we are united and working together to try to make it happen.
These are privately owned properties. The privately owned properties are owned by people who want you give them a ceiling or go into the ceiling. So once you say that these can have a higher density residential, they're going to have a higher density residential. So all the planning and wishes that we might have no impact. They have no constraint. They have no restriction. The restriction only exists now. And once you lift that ceiling, they're going to the ceiling with market rate housing. They're not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. They're not going to create affordable housing. That's just a sham. And I think that pretend otherwise is really a mistake. I mean, you are dramatically going to change the character of this neighborhood, of this area, for no purpose other than putting money in the pockets of the developers who want to change. That's all it's going to do.
I'm totally sympathetic to that point of view, but I would just like to clarify that this is the Office of Planning's plan, and even though it is said that ANCs have great weight, that great weight is routinely ignored by the government. So I would love it if the person who was standing before has any ideas how, how would you counter what I see as basically, a juggernaut. And I'm trying, being on this task force, I've tried to go against my instincts to think, how can I lasso this juggernaut and make it work for us? But I'm just curious, what would you have us do?
Everything seems like a juggernaut until it's not. I mean, the fact is, this is, a partially elected body and other volunteers who care about the community. And if the community stands up and decides that it's going to take a stand and not just accept that, oh, it's a juggernaut, so we have to concede. I mean, why exist if you have to concede? All these people are here because they have different concerns. And everyone wants to have their voice and their concern heard. And that's what the ANC has the capacity to do. It does legally carry great weight. And in fact, what the ANC says does matter. And if you lay out rational, clear, and grounded objections which exist for this, you can have an impact. And in fact, they can go forward over that. I mean, if your view is they're going to go forward over that no matter what, then I don't know why anyone actually runs for the ANC. And I don't know why anyone would be on this commission.
Ma'am, we have contemplated even more despairing conversations than you're thinking about. Consider this, that in this city, the Court of Appeals has, in the past, ruled on more than a dozen occasions to stop a developer. Now, without even getting into the taste issues or any other issues, social issues involved in that. Nonetheless, that's what has happened. But it's not, but it's going to stop. It's going to stop the framework of the comprehensive plan that has been legislated into law just lately. Puts an end to it. It strips the idea of compatibility from the consideration that the Court of Appeals has relied upon to stop all of these projects. Now, if you're standing on the street and someone comes up to you and they says, "Where's your wallet?" you need to consider what's just been said to you. And so what we're trying to do is to find a way. We know that the Court of Appeals is not going to support the argument you just made. It's been stripped. It's not going to happen.
The argument I just made was not about going to the Court of Appeals and filing a lawsuit. The argument I just made...
And that's where you end up when you object to zoning changes, etc. I'm not making the argument about whether we want it.
Can I say something very quickly? First, personally, you're preaching to the choir. I agree with you 100%. But this is a political process. We have elected council members. The council members for this ward, each one of them voted to eliminate the language from the framework element that Alan was just talking about, that required compatibility not only with the character and scale of the neighborhood, but the physical and visual character of it. Your council members voted to do that on 5 days' notice.
That's a huge point, because that means that neighbors really can't sue and object anymore.
Correct. But I just want to emphasize to your point, which is, well, what can you do? The task force is challenged with what we have been presented with by the DC Council. And what we've been presented with by the Office of Planning. And I agree with you, if there's a groundswell of support in the community that it is inappropriate to have a wholesale upfluming of the corridor without real obvious benefits for affordable housing, but what the small area plan is trying to address that. But I encourage you to call Brandon Todd.
Yes, can I say something about that? Because,
and Mary Chey, and every other council member, because they unanimously voted for this.
Yeah. And also, wait, let me say something. You can't wait. You're talking about council. You've talked about no, not just.
Excuse me, everybody stop talking.
No,
Everybody stop talking. Everybody stop talking. Okay? Don't talk over each other. I will
raise my
recognize.
hand.
I will recognize you.
And I was trying to give you a moment.
Okay.
And please do not interrupt.
Yeah,
Please do not
sorry.
interrupt.
So I think okay, I'm not really good at this. Ooh, okay. So I don't really need the microphone, but to your point, Andrea, I'm sorry I missed you. You're right. You all, you're the ANC. I want to commend you for doing these steps that I was not aware of until tonight's meeting. At the same time, their weight only carries so much weight. I've worked with developers for 10 years as a consultant when Muriel Bowser was a council member and represented Ward 4 when I lived in 2 different houses in Ward 4. She gets a lot of money from real estate developers. She is not interested, the only reason she wants affordable housing now is because she wants to get elected, and she's allowed the developers to run roughshod all over the land in exchange for contributions. So now she's got to try to follow through with what she promised to people. You talk about affordable housing. Affordable housing starts with not letting developers run roughshod all over the city. Affordable housing starts with them following through on their commitment to have more than 10%. And they're not being checked. They're going, so I want to commend you all. As far as solutions, you got some great ideas. I spent a lot of time writing letters to Brandon Todd, and getting him to come to meetings, because we have drug recovery houses, a lot of them in our neighborhood and in Ward 4. You need to get activated and start emailing and demanding meetings with Brandon Todd. The ANC cannot do it all. And ultimately, as this gentleman pointed out, the council is held accountable to their votes. We have been engaging Brandon Todd on this very issue with the Episcopal School and other issues since this summer. So I tell you, you know your neighbors, start emailing him. Tell him where you want his accountability to be and demand that he meet with you. That's what we do. That's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to testify at the hearing. You're going to have to go to the Office of Planning. It's time to write. You can't just tell the ANC to do it and, oh, you guys aren't doing anything. I'm a taxpayer, you're a taxpayer. We got to help them out.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. I mean,
Okay.
and the mayors, you need to hold the mayor accountable with what she is doing in her record. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Okay. Ron.
Wait till I'm finished before you dismiss me, please. Because I'm the contrarian voice here. I just want to point out a couple of things. This plan is based on increasing density in order to create opportunities for housing, which is desperately needed in the city. Increasing the housing supply has an impact on housing affordability across the board. The OP strategy here is that once you create opportunities to upzone these areas, you create a situation in which you can leverage with the developers to get more than the minimum inclusionary zone. Yes, you might have private developers, or as Randy's alluded to, we're really committed to trying to figure out strategies where we can leverage the mayor's interest right now in redistributing where affordable housing is, and maybe find ways to turn some of these private properties into nonprofit development. But the idea is to leverage these PUDs or upzoning to create more significant amounts of affordable housing. It's a very legitimate, I think, strategy. In addition, another impetus behind this plan, and that creating opportunities for affordable housing and looking to Rock Creek West to provide a bunch of it is fundamental to this plan. I don't think, as John was saying, that politically there's any way around that we have to deal with strategically. The other emphasis in this plan is that there's a climate and environmental emphasis that building more density in transit-rich environments and close to transit is universally considered the most environmentally responsible way to build. And the judgment that OP has made, and we've had a lot of discussion about, is that these locations along here along Connecticut Avenue are reasonable places for modest increases in density. And the last thing I would add, and I think the compatibility issue that Jonathan mentioned he's incorrect. It's all over this comp plan that buildings have to be, ease themselves into their environment and such. But I've lost my train of thought here. Jonathan, he got me upset there. Go ahead.
So, Ron is correct in saying, I'm paraphrasing badly here, we basically can't get out of, politically cannot get out of, agreeing to some production of affordable housing, and I'll tell you why. Well, I'll prove it. So this is the Housing Equity Report. It's very short, it's chock full of facts, it's online. I can try to post it to the listserv tonight, or with the email list going around, if you want me to send it to you, or with the other handouts if you weren't able to get them. But this is very important document. The mayor issued the first ever mayor's order on housing in May of this year. It's a mayor's order, and all DC government agencies are now directed to chart a path forward, and I'm quoting, towards the mayor's goal of producing 36,000 new homes. And I quote, chart a path forward to 36,000 new homes by 2025, citywide. And again, and 1/3 of those, 12,000 citywide, are to be affordable housing. And of those 12,000, 1,990, as has been explained, are targeted for Rock Creek West. Now, why is that? Why are we in the bullseye? The mayor's order, quoting, required a review of how existing affordable housing is concentrated in some parts of the city, threatened in others, and here, ding, 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 imagine this is bold and underlined and italicized, and is extremely limited in availability in some areas due to a historic legacy of exclusionary and discriminatory land use decisions. And this is mentioned throughout the report. Later on, another aspect to understand is that the Rock Creek West planning area has had a equitable distribution weighting share applied. And what that means is we have to make up for our discriminatory and exclusionary past by creating a weighted share of affordable housing units so that the goal of 15% of housing units is equitably distributed across areas of the city. They want 15% affordable housing across the board. All of these numbers and charts are all in this document, and you can read it for yourself. But that's what I wanted to point out, that if it sounds like we're sort of rubber stamping this, it's absolutely not true. First of all, we're not the ANC. A lot of us, I'm just a random mom who lives on Western Avenue. I'm not the ANC. Many of us aren't, about half of us are not. And second of all, we fight. We have many different opinions, and the email threads are exhausting, but we all care. But we have been hashing this out from every angle. You have no idea. This is in no way a lockstep group at all. And third of all, even those of us who fight, we all realize that there's, and I can't say it any other way, there's no way we're getting out of this. We have to agree to produce some affordable housing. We can't say absolutely not, no way, because the mayor has already been reported in the Washington Post as saying that she is going to shame us, that we will be portrayed, in her words, as shameful for opposing affordable housing, that we are going to be shamed into it, right? So we're trying to figure out what is the intelligent way to have affordable housing, which at our last meeting, the attendees and also the Lafayette Facebook group and those of us in our fights and everything, we all support diversity and affordable housing, but the point is we do not want, I think most if not all of them, do not want vast numbers of market rate housing just for the little 10% dregs of affordable units. Why do we need to build 100 units to get 10 that are affordable when we could just build a higher percentage of affordable housing? So what I've said many times is, if affordable housing truly is the priority, the commitment, and the goal, then let's build affordable housing.
That's the leverage that we have when we get down to the small area plan. We can always say, Mayor, you told us to do this. We're going to do it the way we think is best for our community, and you've got to support us because you told us to do this. So we're not going to stand for a private developer coming in and putting in a pittance number of affordable units. That's not going to be, it's not going to fly. And we've got that leverage now because we're going to make the mayor and the council, everybody else, whoever approves this thing in the end, we're going to make them come up with the affordable housing that they said was important. And we're going to make sure that we get that in our community and not anything else. So I think that's the best strategy. Is it everything that everybody would want? I mean, maybe not. But I think we've got to adopt a strategy that's got a good chance of success. And I think this strategy does. Chris?
Let me just add one thing. This thing about affordable housing and upzoning is a national trend throughout the country. Certain cities have eliminated single-family housing. The city of Minneapolis has eliminated single-family housing to provide more affordable housing throughout the city. As I understand it, the state of Oregon has eliminated single-family housing. So this is Washington's response to a national crisis. I mean, we have a crisis throughout the country. People can't afford to buy a house, and it's a problem. And so I do think it's our responsibility to find a way to do our bit here in shedding shades.
Yeah, I would just add to that there was an effort on the council before the framework element was approved to eliminate single-family zoning here, but it was not made part of the framework element.
Yeah, let me just mention one other thing that I think is important for us to consider as we go through this. What we would like ideally, and we've talked about this as a group as well, is that the affordable housing is not just a rental unit, that it's an opportunity to own, and it's an opportunity to own something that's going to be affordable in perpetuity. In other words, they'll have a stake in the equity of the condo or whatever it is they buy, but they are not going to be able to sell it on the market and reap all of that benefit. It's going to have to go back to the original developer, nonprofit, presumably, who would then resell it as another affordable unit. So those are the kinds of things I think, if we build that in, then people have built equity. And it's not just a matter of renting a unit, it's building wealth. And that's what we want. We also, the other thing that I think is important is that this not just be a bunch of small one-bedroom or studio apartments, that we have some family units, that this is not just for singles or couples, some families. Yes, ma'am.
Past my bedtime, actually. So you said there was guiding principles in your decision making, and one of those was for schools. So a lot of conversation is about equitable housing, building units. Is it 3 stories, 4 stories? But my main concern, having a 4th grader and a 6th grader to overflowing schools, are schools. So are we spending as much time and energy and planning for schools as we are for housing? And even if this group is the ANC also thinking and planning about schools and the city government? Because it takes a long time to build a school.
Well, the short answer is this group and the ANC have education as a primary priority. And we recognize, we had a presentation back last spring of a study that had been done on the Wilson feeder system, which is all the schools that feed into Wilson High School. And that study concluded that we need 3 new elementary schools, a new middle school, and a new high school over the next 10 years. And that's just looking at the kids that are in the pipeline right now. Our neighborhood is very attractive to young families, particularly, because we do have good schools. And I emphasized this to Director Trueblood when he came to our ANC meeting. I said, this is not going to be an attractive neighborhood if the schools deteriorate. And if their schools are overcrowded and they're not getting a good education, this is not going to be an attractive neighborhood and people aren't going to live here. People will move away. And so it is essential that they address the school's problem. And it's not as if they have ignored it in the plan. There is a whole element that addresses educational facilities. But it doesn't have the kind of specificity that the Love Map does, for instance. It doesn't say, okay, we need a new school here, and we are going to fund it this way. That's the kind of specificity that is absolutely essential, I think. Otherwise, you're just mouthing words. And what we're asking for and we're insisting on in our comments, and I think this reflects the task force certainly, and I'm sure the ANC as well, is some specificity about that. And that this, you can't just have a model that creates this huge amount of growth. I mean, the projections are that the city's going to be, this is ridiculous, and Lee tells us about it all the time, but the projections are it's going to be almost 1 billion people by 2045. That's crazy unless you've got a really good plan for being able to have schools and parks and recreation centers and transportation and police and fire and all those things too. So it's, those are absolutely essential, and we're putting, our discussion tonight has been mostly about housing, but we are really focusing a lot of attention on that issue. And there are others as well who are, and I know I spoke with someone today who is preparing lengthy comments about the educational element, and that's going to be a clear focus for us.
This has sort of already been said, but I'm going to say it anyhow. So I personally believe that there should be no discussion about any of this without first discussing infrastructure, and that includes schools, transportation, and everything else, because as I mentioned to somebody, as an analogy, you don't build a 5-bedroom house and then say, you know, a bathroom would have been a good thing to have. So, you know, infrastructure is very important, and this doesn't address that. The other thing that isn't really pointed out is that this wasn't a well-conceived plan from the beginning, and I don't want to throw any other neighborhood under the bus, but I'm just going to use it as a comparison, because we had a couple of owner-developers propose amendments. We got some of that specific upzoning for a couple of properties. The corner of Connecticut or Circle, mine is now being forced out, M&T Bank, and other neighborhoods that are very similar like to this that didn't have anybody propose any amendments, such as Forest Hills where Politics Proposes. They don't have the same concerns going on. And I don't mean to say that they should have the same concerns that we do, but this was very developer-driven, so I agree with whoever mentioned that. And when you look at all of these things, you know, there are other jurisdictions. For instance, 5333 Connecticut Avenue, 221 units, only 19 are affordable, and those are all apartments, they're not condos, so there's nothing about people being able to buy into the wealth. The West End Library, that, you know, beautiful structure. Some of those condos go for $4.5 million, and there's a very small percent of affordable units, and those too are rental units. So there's nothing to guarantee that certain kinds of development will yield what all of us think would be a good thing to have, that that's more affordable housing. In Arlington recently, Arlington County, together with a nonprofit, they 100% funded an entire building for affordable housing because they actually put their money where their mouth was, and we're not getting the same kind of consideration for things. So there are places that in this neighborhood that would be appropriate, but instead of having, as somebody mentioned, 1 or 2 units that are affordable in expensive condos, I personally believe that, well, I also personally believe in workforce housing, which isn't addressed in the plan at all, really. That there are other things that we could look at. There are opportunities, I think, to, even while we're taking this track, to shoot holes in what's been proposed so far, and what a lot of people think needs to go forward. And but remember, the 1,990 affordable housing units aren't all for this block in Rock Creek West. There are many other neighborhoods in Rock Creek West, which is mostly Ward 3, that are dealing with this also. So I agree that there are many ways that we could do this without the just counting on the ANC, that ground support to handle a lot of these things is worthwhile, that putting the council members' feet to the fire on things is necessary. They understand voting, and that's why I think the more people that participate in this whole process, survey, meetings, or anything else, I think we have a better chance of getting what we think is smart, worthwhile development that fits in with the vision of 80% of that vision is agreed upon, I think, by this task force, and probably by members of the community as well.
Laura.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. I agree with what you said. When your question about the schools, I think it's a concern. The part of the comprehensive plan 2309.9, that's part of the Rock Creek West element where they look at Ward 3 and Chevy Chase. And it talks about schools and libraries, and it said they should place, the existing text says it should place a high priority on expansion, renovation, improvement of schools and libraries, and that the current overcrowding should be considered. What they are taking, what they plan to take out, what they have stricken out is that the overcrowding should, in the approval of any residential development that could further exacerbate school overcrowding. In other words, they used to consider upzoning, but if it was going to increase the school crowding, they would consider that a negative factor. They want to take that out, and they want to add in expanding existing school facilities as an option. We can't keep expanding. I live across from the Lafayette School and the park and the rec center, and it's like hell in a small place. We've had renovations every year since I moved there, except for 2. And that was like, what, 11 years ago. And the school is above capacity. The city, I mean, it's just crazy. We can't, my kids are in Deal, and my son's binder's a mess. He comes back, his clothes are torn up. I'm like, what happened to you? And he said, the halls are so crowded, I get knocked all the time. Because he's knee-high to grasshopper and nobody's line of sight. He spends all day in a trailer because they are out of room. That school was renovated in 2015 for 1,200 kids, and it's over 1,500 now. And the city wants to take out any consideration of school overcrowding out of our Rock Creek plan. I hope that the ANC will address it, but you're totally right about the developers.
We, just FYI, we actually, this particular provision was the subject of a bunch of emails back and forth today, and it was put on, it was suggested among us, and I suspect there's universal agreement to object to taking out that provision in that policy.
And what about just expanding existing facilities? They've already been expanded. I mean, I don't know where you can go.
What we're suggesting is identify locations for new schools.
Right.
And funding for new schools.
Right, but I think they added in expanding existing school facilities. We just can't keep, there's nowhere else to go.
Yeah, we're definitely making that point.
Okay.
So, there's one
Ted,
oh, I'm sorry.
sorry, Ted, you need a mic.
Thank you, Francis. I'm Ted Baldwin, Morrison Street. Spent 30, 40 years doing affordable housing, mostly in Montgomery County, but also here in D.C. And just a few thoughts on this, on your principles. The first one about government and nonprofit developers providing more affordable housing. Well, when we look at that, I think the phrase mixed income housing really ought to be in here. We started doing mixed income housing in Montgomery County 50 years ago. When the IZ program began, I helped bring IZ into DC, worked on it for 5 years as a volunteer, and I think it's good. But we were developing as government and as nonprofit mixed income housing, 30, 40%, maybe 50% affordable, the rest market affordable. And the reason why, we can't get the soft money. I know soft money from the feds, they've lost interest, or from the district. The Council for Smarter Growth, Coalition for Smarter Growth, is estimated to be $300 to $400 billion to have a substantial program here in D.C. The mayor has been very proud of getting up to $100 million. It shows you how far you have to go if you want to build all these units and build them to serve very low-income households. It's a very expensive thing. The suggestion would be, in the small area in particular, say, we're looking for people coming in to build 30, 40, maybe 50% of the units affordable. A third of them, people under 30%, a third of them under 50%, another third under 60%, and that's our first priority. We don't want people coming in with just the minimum 10% IC requirement. I think this can be done and can be reinforced. Thank you.
I'd just like to say something about the Rock Creek West area element. So this is the current run, and if you go onto the Office of Planning website, you'll see the current run. The most important document for us, frankly, is for you to look at the red line, which the speaker was just talking about. Because the red line are the Office of Planning's proposed changes to the current document. And everybody should read those red lines and make their own decision as to what the focus is and whether it's appropriate. I don't want to get into the detail now because we don't have time. But the Office of Planning is accepting your comments to the comprehensive plan generally and specifically to the Rock Creek West area element. So please go on the website, look at the element. If you see a deletion in there that you disagree with or you agree with, let them know, because they are going to take those comments on board, and we will take those comments on board to the extent you let us know. If you don't say anything, nothing's going to change.
Let's hear from people we haven't heard from before. Yes, ma'am. Raise your hand.
Well, I was just going to say I'm a little confused because you're inviting individual comments, but I thought I heard you say, Mr. Chairman, you wanted us to put our comments through you.
Well, both. You can do both. If you want to give your individual comments to the council or to the Office of Planning at this stage, you're perfectly entitled to do that. I had someone from the Office of Planning well, I guess it was True Blood at our meeting. The director said, you know, don't expect to get a response, though, from the Office of Planning to your individual comments. They're going to pay a lot more attention to the ANC comments. So it's best, you can certainly make those comments individually, but if you give them to the ANC, then we can incorporate that in our comments that will carry this great weight. I mean, that really is a fiction in a lot of respects. We are advisory neighborhood commissions. The advisory is really important. We have no power to do anything, and nobody pays any attention to us unless we're persuasive. If we're persuasive, they will pay attention to us, but otherwise, no.
So, and I have one other comment. I guess it's times like this I really miss the Northwest Current.
Yes.
Because it was a great window on what was happening locally, but there are quite a few older residents who are not on email in some of the apartment buildings who will be dramatically affected by this growth and some of these changes to, you know, if the market's taken down or some of the shopping won't be able to just Uber whatever kind of places. Also, a lot of the younger people are not on listservs, they're on Twitter, things like that, so I hope we're exploring different ways to reach people.
Is there anybody here that lives in one of the apartment buildings? Anybody? Nobody? Okay. I was just looking for some help, and
We've been looking for ways to get into the apartment buildings so that we can get more visibility there. We recognize that's not easy. Yes, sir. Sure.
It's one of the best, okay. I think my name is Brian Becker, I live in Livingston as well. I think your last comment there was important. The question really is, how can the ANC and how can this community be most persuasive in trying to sort of mitigate against a plan that's actually very destructive and not helpful. It's not going to be helpful for the schools, it's not going to be helpful for small businesses. It's not going to really effectively address the issue of affordable housing, because affordable housing isn't like a hurricane or a tornado or a natural disaster that just swept in. It's created by the same politicians and the same developers who are now using affordable housing as the pretext for knocking down these buildings and increasing density here, which is going to lead to a myriad of problems. So how do we become most persuasive? I mean, that really is the issue. The ANC, I can see your approach is how to mitigate, really. You're looking for a handle for how to mitigate against the worst features of this plan, which is basically a bad plan and doesn't solve the fundamental problem of affordable housing, which I think we all need to vigorously support affordable housing. So here's the thing, the ANC does have limited authority from a legal point of view, but this community could be fired up. This community could become mobilized. This community could become a real, visible, vocal sort of player in the process. And I think the way we can most effectively leverage our combined power, the ANC's potential power, the community's potential power, because we do limited democracy, purportedly, is to be able to first and foremost expose the plan for what it is. That it's really not about affordable housing. That it's really being driven by the developers and the politicians who have created the affordable housing crisis. So we have to expose it, and then once we expose it for what it is, which I think is more or less a pretext or a charade, then I think we have to use all of our power, all of our capacity, our voices, to be able to say no because it's bad for schools, no because it's bad for small businesses, no because it's bad for congestion. We have to say it loud. We have to say it together. We have to be visible and vocal, and then the ANC will be more persuasive. Because if you're taking one approach at mitigation and trying to be, for the lack of a better word, reasonable, there's no reason we have to be reasonable in the face of a very destructive plan. Like, let's be reasonably unreasonable, at least, and try to use the traditional methods that we have to make a stink, to make a noise, to create pressure on the politicians, and to expose the charade for what it is. And that way we sort of call the mayor's bluff. It's not about affordable housing. If you want to create affordable housing, have an absolute 100% commitment that all the units will be affordable, that there will be a public option, that it's not going to be run-down public housing, but affordable and good housing. All of those things are doable. It's the richest country in the world. Anyway, that's the way maybe together this community can sort of make our voices louder, our presence more felt in the city, again, for the city council people, but for the council writ large. Thank you.
Following that applause is difficult for what I have to say. But I don't think this is a plan. I don't think mitigation is what I'm about in this plan. The fact is that this sort of very modest increased density in this sort of location is basically sort of state-of-the-art planning in a green manner and in a way to increase housing availability, not just here, everywhere. The fact is that it is not something that's going to destroy our neighborhood, that this sort of density and generally creates, when it's done well, and the small area plan is all about making sure it's done well, it increases walkability, it makes retail for mom and pops as well as all kinds of neighborhoods serving retail healthier and more viable, and the opportunity to make things better is just baked into this plan. Very modest increases in density and hopefully affordable housing. And the other thing, again, strategically, when you talk about making this neighborhood's voice heard and being a force against this sort of change, the answer will be yes, you've done that in the past. And there are 470 units of affordable housing in Rock Creek West, and they're virtually its twin in Rock Creek East. There are 2,518. Those are facts. They're driving this downtown, and I don't think it's a matter of just doing the best. I think it's a matter of also facing that there is an inequitable distribution of affordable housing, and we should be doing something about it. Tad can speak to the challenges to doing public housing, I totally agree. I think it would be great if we could have Scandinavian social housing of that quality and that scale up here, but that doesn't seem to be something we do here.
Let me just say too, it's a great idea, I think, to mobilize the community here, but this is the 4th meeting that we've had, and like I said, this is like 3 times as many people as we've had at any of the previous meetings. And it's taken a long time for the community to realize, oh, the comprehensive plan has an impact here. Maybe I should pay some attention to that. And it is not being done elsewhere. I talked to someone today who said other ANCs have no clue as to what's going on. And they are at square one and haven't educated themselves over this time period. So it's not, you are a unique group in the city that is really paying attention now, and it's unusual. So I think if the Office of Planning heard from more people like you, that would be great. But there just aren't enough people out there now who are mobilized to think about these issues and try to resolve and come up with significant comments and recommendations.
That's what Randy did. I was sending comments not only to the ENCs, but also to OP.
Yeah, yeah.
If you get politically strong enough, they will listen.
Right. Yes, Robert. You should get a microphone.
Yeah, I'm having a very hard time picturing upzoning or greater density in this neighborhood. Would that mean knocking, tearing down, raising the apartment buildings? Would it be infilling in places? Paint a picture for me, if you would.
Well, that's
how you would do
we
that.
discussed at our last meeting the vision of what we thought for this corridor, and some of the things we talked about were perhaps maybe putting housing above the library. The Safeway has a big, huge parking lot. Maybe that is an ideal target. The Wells Fargo Bank, which has a huge parking lot and a tiny little bank there. And those are the kinds of things that we were looking at. But what we need is, again, this small area plan that would present a vision. And I'm thinking, it's not just a bunch of words, but maybe we have some drawings, we have some ideas, we have some specific things. This is what the entrance into the district should look like. And it would be stepped down to the residential areas behind it. There are lots of things. I'm not a planner, I'm not an architect, so I can't say exactly what it's going to be, but I think we've got enough resources in our community who do have those skills, who can, over the next year, come up with some really great plans that would excite people. Even developers, I think, might be excited by it. And these are the kinds of things I think that we could, it would be our stamp on this neighborhood for the next 40 years.
Having hit 3 of the buttons he just mentioned, I would just say that one of the things in the small area plan is we start to look at the realities of what's there. There's a big site at Safeway, yes, but on the other side of the street, it's all broken up into little sites that that the density that's being offered doesn't justify, knocking everything down and building again. So how would things fit in? So it's that granular analysis and visualization that we're really looking forward to.
Okay, we're going to take one more comment, that's it, and then we've got to talk about what our next steps are, because we've got to end at 9 o'clock. Yes, go ahead.
Just super quickly, so the request was to paint a picture of what could happen along the corridor. At the last meeting, we talked a lot about it, in other meetings too. What is possible, very loosely speaking, is some number of stories in the mixed-use zone along the corridor with some number of stories of residences above ground floor retail. And it wouldn't be every single lot. There are private owners, there are historically preserved locations, etc. So I'm not saying this across the board, but in terms of just visualizing very loosely what this mixed-use business is all about, it would be residences above ground floor retail, or could be, I should say.
So if I get to ask my question.
Yes, absolutely.
Just a point, and just a point of information. Can you give a comparison? That would help in visualization. So, for example, we now low-density commercial, and the proposal is for moderate density residential. Does that
And low-density commercial
together? So is that like Tenleytown? Is that like Bethesda? Can you give some other comparison? That would help.
It's not Bethesda. It's not Bethesda.
I can answer that question directly, because we actually asked, let me finish. We asked the Office of Planning that question, because everybody wants to know. And the answer we got, and I can read it to you in verbatim, but I won't because it'll take too long, but Mr. Osberg, who works with the Office of Planning, and he is the planner for this area, he said that a change to moderate density residential equates to a zone of MU4. So then we said, well, what does MU4 mean? Because the change in the flume is very significant, because once you have that change, then you can go to the zoning commission and say, I would like to increase my zone density to reflect the increase in the flume density, which is on the map. So yes, developers will say, now I want an MU4 zone or more. And what he said is an MU4 zone, examples of that are like Columbia Heights, Georgia Avenue, and he gave particular locations. And they are multi-story buildings, fairly dense and large. And then we said, well, is that the limit? And he said, no, other zones may apply. And that's why the language that was deleted from the framework element by the DC Council becomes so important. Because they deleted this language, and one said they didn't, but they did.
Well,
I'm sorry, I should have said that.
Yes, John, let's just suffice it to say, we can't tell precisely what's going to happen. And that's why we're going to have a small area plan. That's the whole purpose. Let me just, Marilyse did a very good job at our last meeting of capturing the characteristics that we saw as the vision of this corridor.
It was what the attendees said.
Yeah, she asked for a show of hands, but it was after a long discussion too. But these are let me just read a few of the bullet points, and there are more of them here. Should I read them all? New buildings be visually and physically compatible with existing buildings on Connecticut Avenue. New buildings to have very attractive facades to preserve the look of individual storefronts rather than relentless slab structures. Continued protection of historic structures. Attractive streetscapes with trees, benches, and flowers. Retention of local mom and pop businesses. Parking, including potentially underground parking to support the commercial businesses and new residential development. Enhance the space around the Chevy Chase Library and Community Center to create a village center with features such as a community garden, mini urban farm, etc. Modernization of the Chevy Chase Library may include mixed use. Green buildings with geothermal, solar, green roofs, etc., etc. Art and signage that emphasize the history and community, including the diverse roots of the community. Ensure new and affordable housing is offered on a first priority basis to teachers, librarians, first responders, etc., who work locally to reduce their travel time and costs. Those are the kinds of things that we were talking about. And that's the vision so far. And we're going to get a lot more information from the survey, I think, that will contribute to this. But those are the kinds of things we've been talking about. And that, I think, gives us some guidance as to what we would like to have there. now our challenge is how do we make that happen? Yeah, and also how do we make connected infrastructure? Absolutely. I mean, these are not, we're not in silos here. Each one of these is connected. And so we're going to be addressing them holistically. Okay, we've got 4 minutes left until 9 o'clock. And we've got to talk a bit about what our next steps are. Now, given the change in the schedule, I'm going to propose, see what the other task force members think about this, but I'm going to propose a meeting in January, early January, before the January 10th deadline for individual comments. Now, we have an ANC meeting on January 13th, so that will give us an opportunity to have a discussion at that ANC meeting as well about the ANC resolution at that point. What I would hope to have before the next task force meeting would be a draft of a report that would be the subject of discussion then. And it would include the survey results because we'll have them by then. So that's what I would like to do. And if we can settle on a date for a meeting, I would like to go ahead and do that right now. Like the week of the 6th.
There's a very important meeting with the Celtics downtown on the 6th. Can we do the 7th?
The 7th is fine. Okay. Let's shoot for January 7th for a task force meeting. And at that point we will have, and we'll post on the ANC's website, and we'll have links to it that we'll send out on a listserv and various other places, everywhere we can think of, with a draft of the report. And I can tell you right now, it's going to be lengthy and dense. I mean, there's going to be a lot of information there because we've already started drafting it. It's going to be long.
Grant?
Yes, Gary.
So since January 10th is the last day for public comments, I think it is very important for not just the task force or the ANC, but for the community to get involved. And I don't think that people submitting individual pieces of testimony to the council or comments is the way to go. I think that there's strength in numbers and that people should group together, whether it's by block, by interest, by anything, but that's what people will understand. It's a lot better to, somebody will take notice if 20 people signed onto a statement that says, this is what we're concerned about, and they get 15 or 20 or 30 comments like that, rather than a lot of individual people just sending things in. It's easy to dismiss an individual comment, it's hard to dismiss a group comment, so I think that's important. And the other thing, just want to say, so we've been told that no other ANC is doing the work around DC that we're doing, in terms of the breadth of our survey, the numbers, and everything else. We had a similar incident like this a couple of years ago with the community center. There was an original budget for $8 million to renovate the community center. We did a community survey. We had about 950 responses, and we ended up getting about $19 million to renovate the community center. That kind of information, that kind of data goes a lot further than anecdotal information or people just complaining about things, but that's important. The more we get, the stronger that'll be, and I just encourage people to respond to that.
So the next meeting is January 7th.
Correct.
At this place.
This place at 7 o'clock. And that will give us, that will give us an opportunity then to have a meeting for the ANC on January 13th, another ANC meeting on January 27th, and then there's another meeting before we have to send in the resolutions on February 10th. So we can have as many as 3 ANC meetings that will also consider the final resolution of what we're going to submit. So now that we've got a little bit more time, there's some opportunities Alan wants to say.
The reason why the city comes up here when we ask them, and why they pay attention to what we have to say, is because look at the voting ratios, because you voted.
Before we adjourn, can we get that sign-in sheet that my neighbor circulated with
Yeah, and if anybody hasn't put their name on it, you get it, put your name on it.
Can I get a show of hands? Who will talk to their neighbors and friends about this process? Who can visit the listserv? Who would be willing to hand out a flyer, maybe under doors on your block?
Before everyone leaves, if I could just have for 1 second, thank you very much for coming out. I really appreciate it, and especially on a night like tonight, it's not a fit night for man or beast. But I appreciate your coming out, and we like hearing back from you. Thank you very much.